The mountain man entered a cave to warm himself, unaware an orc widow was already living there. "Come no closer, human, and I may let you live." The voice came from the dark at the back of the cave, thick and cracked with fever. Logan froze in the entrance, snow melting off his shoulders, his axe still slung across his back, and his fingers too numb to have used it anyway. When he lifted his little pine torch, the light found her. An orc woman, huge, even folded against the stone, one hand pressed to a wound in her side that had gone black at the edges. Blood had frozen into the fur beneath her. She was shivering, and she was trying very hard not to let him see it. He should have run. Instead, he set down the torch, opened his coat, and knelt. He did not notice the iron ring hanging at her throat. "If you are new here, welcome to Orcbond Saga, where the smallest people carry the heaviest doors. Subscribe now, because what this man is about to do in that cave will cost him everything." It was the second week of January. The storm had been building over Grey Hollow since noon, and by dusk the mountain was gone inside it. No sky, no trail, only the white coming sideways through the pines. Logan Hale had gone into that cave for one reason, and it was not a noble one. He wanted to be warm. He should have noticed at the entrance. 2 sticks had been driven into the frozen ground beside the mouth, crossed and bound, and a strip of dark cloth hung from them, stiff with ice. Logan took it for a hunter's marker and pushed past. Inside, his torch showed him 3 things in the first 10 steps. A fire, not his, a ring of stones carefully laid, with a bed of grey ash in the middle of it, cold but not old. Somebody had banked that fire and let it go out and had meant to build it again, a sleeping place. Dry grass and pine boughs, dragged in armfuls from somewhere below the snow line, heaped against the driest wall, and bones, 2 hares and a grouse, picked clean, stacked in a neat pile. Beside them, 3 hollowed stones set out under a seam in the roof where the melt came through, so that they filled themselves with water. While their owners slept, Logan was still working that out when the voice came out of the dark, and then he was kneeling in front of something that could have folded him in half without standing. Up she was a head and a half taller than him even seated. Her arms were roped with scars. Her skin was deep green, like moss on a riverstone, and it had gone grey around the mouth. When she reached for the blade beside her, her hand shook so badly that she let it go and pretended she had never reached at all. He told her he was not going to hurt her. He said it slowly, the way you speak to a horse that has already been beaten by somebody else. He told her that if she killed him, she would be alone in a cave with a corpse and a fire that was going out, and that neither of them wanted that. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said one word, "Water." He filled one of her own hollowed stones and held it for her because her hands were shaking too badly. She drank it all and did not thank him. The wound was under her ribs on the left. A puncture, not a slash. Something long had gone into her and came out again, and somebody had packed it with moss in a great hurry, and the moss had rotted in the heat of her own body. Logan had never read a book in his life, but he had burned charcoal on that mountain for 20 years and had cut himself in every way a man can be cut. And he knew what a wound looked like when it had begun to turn. He said he would have to open it, and that it would be bad, she said without much interest, that he could try. He built the fire back up in her own stone ring, and he saw as he did it that the ash was 5 or 6 days deep. He asked her how long she had been in here. She said long enough to learn which way the wind came in. He asked why she had not gone down to the village. She did not answer that at all. She only turned her head slightly toward the mouth of the cave, toward the crossed sticks and the frozen rag, and Logan understood in a slow and unpleasant way that the marker at the entrance had not been left by a hunter. It had been left by her. It was a warning, and it was pointed outward. When he finally reached toward her, her hand came up and closed around his wrist. It closed all the way around. Her fingers overlapped. He felt his own bones shift slightly under the grip and understood exactly how much of his life was currently hers. She asked what he wanted in exchange. He said he wanted to be warm, and that he could not be warm sitting next to somebody dying. She let go, and in the firelight, he began to notice things. Her cloak was ruined with mud and frozen blood, but under all that, the weave was fine. Heavy, dark cloth, of a kind he had seen once, on a merchant's wife passing through Ashvale with an armed escort, and the hem stitched by a patient hand in a pattern that meant nothing to him, and had clearly meant something to somebody. Her belt buckle was black iron, worked into the shape of a broken mountain, and the blade she kept within reach of her hand, even now, even half dead, was worth more than his hut and everything in it and the land it stood on, he thought, in his simple way, that she must have robbed somebody. When the binding was done, she asked his name. He gave it to me. Logan Hale, charcoal burner. Grey Hollow. She did not give hers. She said only that he was a fool, and that fools die young. He said he had been dying young for 15 years and had made no progress at all. And he rolled a stone out of the fire with a stick and pushed it across the floor to her feet. She looked down at it for a long, strange moment, the way a person looks at a word in a language they were never taught. Then she put her feet against it and slept. Logan did not. He sat up with his back to the wall, looking at a hollowed waterstone and a bed of dry grass and a fire ring built by somebody who was hiding, and he thought, she did not crawl in here to die. She chose this place. She has been watching that trail for 5 days. Who is she watching for? She could not walk far, so he half-carried her, which is to say she put her weight on him, and he did not complain about being crushed. A walk he normally made in an hour took them until dark. Halfway up, they passed the split pine where his trail turned east. He had blazed that tree himself 9 years ago, a cut in the bark to tell him where to leave the deer path. The blaze was gone, not weathered, cut out. A fresh chunk of wood taken off the trunk with a knife and dropped in the snow beneath it. And under the tree, coming out of the pines and running east along the ridge, were footprints. Not his. Not hers. A man's boots, deep and long-strided, made since the storm broke. They came to the tree, stopped, and turned in a slow half-circle, the way a man turns when he is looking for something and is prepared to wait. Logan stepped in front of them. She let him do it. She let him talk for 100 paces, and then she said, without turning her head, that he had missed one. She said there were 3 sets, not 1. She said the second man walked heavy on his right leg, and the third had stood behind the rock and not moved for a long time, because the snow under him was pressed flat and had frozen. Then she said nothing else at all. The whole way to the hut, his home was 1 room, a stone hearth, a bed frame he had made himself out of birch and pegged together because he could not afford nails, a roof patched 3 times with bark and pitch and needing a 4th, and on the windowsill in a row, a dozen small wooden birds. He gave her the bed. She did not fit in it, but she fit in it better than he fit on the floor, which was his whole argument, and he made it badly, and then lay down on the boards before she could argue back. She lay awake most of that first night, working out what he wanted. So on the second morning she asked him straight out what price he set on her life. He was stirring barley over the fire. He said he had not thought about it. She told him that was a stupid answer. She told him she would not be kept like a stray dog in a warm corner, and that if he was waiting for men to come up the mountain and pay him for her, he should say so plainly now, so that she could break his neck and be done with it. He put the spoon down. He looked at her for a while. Then he said the price of her life was that she ate the barley before it went cold, because he had made too much and he hated waste. She stared at him. Then she ate it, all of it. Thin, salty peasant food, and she scraped the bowl. And she could not remember the last time anything had tasted like that. He did not know it yet. But that was the moment she decided not to kill him. She asked him on the 5th night. She said any sane man in that valley would have walked back out into the storm and taken his chances with the snow. Because the snow only kills you. It does not eat you first, she wanted to know, she said. What was wrong with him? Logan sat by the fire for a long time. Then he told her the only story he had. He was the son of a farrier in Ashval, the last village before the road gives up and turns into a goat track. His mother died when he was 6. His father died angry some years later, having been angry every day in between. When Logan was 19, there was a bad winter and a sickness moving through the lowlands, and Ashvali barred its gates and kept them barred. That was not cruelty exactly. That was what everybody did, and what the elders said to do, and the elders were frightened, and frightened men make rules and then feel righteous about obeying them. One night late there was a knocking. A woman had come up the road with a boy on her hip. Logan could hear her through the woods. She was not screaming. That was the part he remembered. She was polite. She asked very politely for a place by any fire at all. She said she did not care whose. His father would not open the door, and Logan was 19 and already a head taller than his father, and could have set the man aside with one arm. He stood in that kitchen and listened to the knocking. Then he listened to it get slower. Then he listened to it stop. He did not move, because nobody else in the village was moving either, and it is a terrible thing. How easy it is to do nothing when everyone around you is also doing nothing. In the morning he found them at the fence. She had wrapped the boy inside her own shawl and put her body around him, curled over him, folded down on top of him like a roof. She had done everything a person can do. It had not been enough. He said he was not a good man. A good man would have opened the door. He said he was only a man who could not walk past somebody freezing in the dark, and that this was not goodness. It was a debt, and it was owed to 2 people who could not collect it. The fire cracked and settled. She said only that he had carried it a long way on his own, and that she would take the other end of it now, if he wanted. He did not entirely understand what she meant. He felt it anyway, in the middle of his chest, like a hand. That night she talked in her sleep for the first time. She said a name. He was almost sure of it. A man's name, hard as a struck anvil. Nolan. She said, "Do not give him the ring." Logan lay very still on the floor with his coat under his head. He had not known there was a ring. He had not known there was him. After that he knew to listen. Most of what she said in the dark meant nothing to him. Odd consonants, shapes his mouth could not have made. But twice, in the worst hours before dawn, he heard her counting. Numbers are numbers. He could follow them the way you follow a bell. She always started at 1. She never got past 61. At 61, she stopped dead every time, as though the number were a wall she had walked into. Then she would lie there breathing hard, like a woman who had been running a long way and had not got anywhere. One night, at the end of the counting, she said 4 words in his language. Clearly, she said that she had given the order. Logan lay on the cold boards and did not ask. He had his own knocking at midnight. He understood that some things are not questions. They are wounds, and you do not put your fingers into a wound because you are curious. So he got up quietly, put a log on the fire, rolled a hot stone to the foot of the bed, and lay back down. And that was when the dogs did not bark. There were no dogs on Grey Hollow. That was the point. But the crows in the pines above the woodpile came up all at once, out of the dark, all together, the way crows do when something walks under them. He was still lifting his head when she was already off the bed. She crossed that room without a sound, a woman of her size with a hole in her side, and Logan did not hear one board move. She took the blade off the table, put her back to the wall beside the door, and stood there. She did not open it. She listened, then she opened the door and went out, and came back inside 20 minutes later with snow to her knees and her face closed. She said there was nobody out there. But in the morning, walking the woodpile line, Logan found the tree. It was 50 paces from his own door. Somebody had cut into the bark, fresh, deep, working at chest height with a good knife, and no hurry at all. 3 lines, a shape like a mountain, with the top broken off, the same shape as the buckle on her belt. Neither did she. She had seen it 2 hours before he had. He went down for supplies at the end of January. because he had a woman in his hut eating 3 times what he ate. And a man cannot heal anybody on turnips. The market had 6 stalls and a wet square. He sold his charcoal. He bought salt, flour, oil, a sack of beans, a second sack of beans, and Halloran's brother stepped into his path. He did it in the open, in front of everybody, and he did not shout. He said that 11 days ago he had come up the ridge trail to look at his father's high fold, and that he had seen something standing in the trees above Logan Hale's hut. Something tall, he said. Much too tall. Green. Logan laughed at him. Nobody else laughed, and then Sennett's boy, 9 years old, still thin from a fever that had kept him in bed since Candlemas, walked out of the crowd and reached up, and took something off the shoulder of Logan's coat. He held it up in the grey light, where everybody could see it. A hair, black and coarse and very long, longer than any hair on any head in that square. The square went quiet. Old Perrin came through the crowd. He was 71, and he walked with a stick, and everybody moved for him. He did not accuse Logan of anything. He asked him one question. He asked who was living in his hut, and Logan Hale, who had never told a serious lie in his life, stood in the middle of the village of his birth and said that he lived alone. He said it clearly. He said it twice. But a hunter named Mabbott, who was leaning on the grain stall and had been watching the whole thing with his arms folded, straightened up and pointed at the sacks on the ground beside Logan's feet. He said that was a lot of beans. He said it was 2 months of food, and salt, and oil, and that he had known Logan Hale 20 years and had never once seen him buy a second sack of anything, because Logan Hale had never once had a second mouth. Nobody moved. Perrin looked at the sacks. Then he looked at Logan's face for a long time, the way old men look at people they have known since they were born. And then he said that Grey Hollow had always been a hard mountain and a hungry one, that it took a man every few winters, that this was known and accepted. He said a hungry thing without. Her face is only weather. He said a hungry thing with a face is something else entirely, and he told Logan to be very careful what he had let out of the snow. Logan carried 50 pounds up that mountain in the failing light and told himself the whole way that it was nothing. Frightened people. A bad winter. Sheep die in the cold. Children get fevers. He was still telling himself that when he came through the trees and saw the light of his own fire in the window, and the enormous shadow of her moving behind it, and for one heartbeat, before he could stop it, something in the animal, part of him went cold. He was ashamed of it before he reached the door. He did not tell her about the market. She knew he was lying inside for 4 minutes. The false thaw came in the 2nd week of February, and it came wrong. Wet snow, then a freeze, then more wet snow. And the roof of that hut had been patched 3 times with bark and pitch, and had been waiting 15 years for somebody to do it properly. On Tuesday, the center beam began to talk. A small sound, a tick, every hour or so, like a knuckle cracking. Logan heard it. He said nothing because there was nothing to say. He could not get up there with a load of pitch and a bad shoulder in a freeze, and he had no timber cut, and he had no money. On Thursday, he came back from the charcoal pit, and she was on the roof. She was on his roof with an armful of split shakes she had made herself, in the freezing wind with a hole in her side, 12 feet up on a slope of ice, and she had already replaced 1/3 of the bark, and she had done it well. And she was working with her left arm, because her right had gone numb an hour ago. There was blood on the shakes. He shouted at her, actually shouted, small and furious and frightened, standing in a yard below a woman twice his mass, waving a piece of firewood at her, telling her to get down before she killed herself, telling her the beam would not hold her weight, telling her she was the most arrogant idiot who had ever lived, and that she could not lift a mountain simply because she was too proud to admit that there was a hole in her. She looked down at him, then she said, the wound was nothing, and then she fainted and fell, and he could not have caught her if he had tried. She went straight through the woodpile and lay in the snow with the split wood scattered around her and her side open again and running dark. He got her inside. It took him 40 minutes and he was crying by the end of it, and he never told anybody that. And somewhere in that, half-conscious, she said that in her hall, a man who spoke to her like this would be taken out and killed. He said that in his hall, which was this hall, which had one bed, no doors worth mentioning. And now, thanks to her, half a roof. People said thank you when somebody fixed their house. He said thank you, and she laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it. Loud, rough, cracked, entirely genuine, and it filled that whole hut and rattled around in it. And it hurt her so badly that she gasped and grabbed her side and laughed again. Anyway, she had not made that sound. Since she was a girl, Logan sat back on his heels, with his hands covered in her blood, and stared at her. Neither of them said anything at all. That night he warmed 2 stones instead of 1, she noticed. She said nothing, and in the morning, when he climbed up to finish the roof she had started, he found something she had left up there, a coil of good rope, tied off on the ridge beam and dropped down the back of the hut, out of sight from the trail. It was a way out. She had built herself a way out of his house. She began teaching him words, and she was a terrible teacher, impatient and mocking, and he loved it. They did it on the trapline, because she would not stay indoors, and he had 30 snares to run. And because she said a language learned sitting down is a language you forget. Vek, strength, but not the strength of arms, she said, and she was insistent about this. Vek is the strength of a thing that holds. A beam, a rope, a word, Morash, clan, the people you would starve for, and Tharn. The fire in the middle of a house. He said his own language had a word for a fire in the middle of a house, and it was hearth. She said no. She said Tharn also meant home, the same word exactly. No difference, because her people did not believe those were 2 separate things, and humans were fools for pretending they were. Since a house without a fire is only a box you die in, he taught her heart, and neighbors, and friends. He showed her the deer path, and the old charcoal road, and the shortcut over the shoulder that saved an hour and would kill you in fog. He showed her the gully on the east face, 40 feet deep and full of loose rock, and told her that men died in it every few years, and that the snow lies over it like a lid. He was proud, showing her. It was the only thing he owned. She listened the way a soldier listens. They found the first thing at midday, a tree with a fresh cut in it. Chest height, 3 lines and a broken mountain. The 4th one she had found that month. And the second one Logan had seen. They found the second thing an hour later, in the lee of a rock above his own hut, with a clean view down onto his own door, a dead campfire. Ringed, banked, and went out 3 or 4 days ago. Beside it, pressed into the frozen ground, the flattened place where a man had lain on his belly for a long time and watched a charcoal burner's hut. Then he said, without looking up, that somebody had been watching his house, and she said, in the flat way of a person closing a door, that somebody had been watching his house for 11 days. He asked why she had not told him. She did not answer. That evening, going back, she led. She took them a way he did not know, up through a cut in the rock behind the ridge, narrow, steep, invisible from below. Coming out 50 paces above his woodpile, he said he had lived here 15 years and had never seen that. She said that was good. He asked her what she meant. She told him she had been keeping it for herself, and now she was giving it to him, and that he was to remember it and never speak of it, and that he was to go up it and not down it if there was ever a night when he had to run. He said he did not understand. She said she knew. Cabe Halloran was 26, and a decent hunter, and a very loud one. He had lost 9 ewes with his father on the coldest night of the year, and he had a brother who had seen something green in the trees. And he sat in the alehouse in Ashvale for most of February, telling anyone who would listen what he was going to do about it. He said he would go up Grey Hollow and find the witch. He said he would bring back proof. A hank of green hair, a tooth, something. On the last day of February he went up the east face with a bow and a bad head and no snowshoes, into a sky that any charcoal burner in that valley could have told him was about to open. The storm lasted 2 days, and on the first night of it, Zara went out. She went at dusk to run the trapline, and she did not come back. Logan sat up. The wind got worse. He stood in the doorway with a lamp at midnight, shouting into a wall of white that swallowed the sound about 4 feet from his face. She came in 3 hours before dawn. She was grey. She was covered to the shoulder in snow that had frozen solid on her. She was moving badly, and her hands were torn, not cut-torn the way hands tear when they have been dragging on rock, and she was carrying a knife. It was not hers. It was a cheap, notched, well-used hunting knife with a horn handle, and there was blood dried into the joint of the blade, and there was a strip of somebody's coat wrapped around it. She put it on the table. She sat down by the fire. She did not speak. Logan looked at that knife for a long time. Then he asked her whose it was. She said nothing. He asked her again. He asked where she had been for 9 hours in a whiteout. He asked her, with his voice shaking, how she had got that knife. And she looked at him, and she did not explain. She had been coming back along the east face when she heard a man screaming under the snow. She had found the gully. She had gone down into it as far as a person can go down into a thing like that, and she had reached, and her hand had closed on a wrist, and the wrist had come away from her because the rock under him had gone. All she had come back with was his knife. Among her people, a warrior who has failed does not stand in a warm room and explain the failure. She does not offer the story as a defense. To do that is to ask to be forgiven, and to ask to be forgiven is to hand another person the right to judge you. And she had been judged by a hall of 9,000 once already, and she had promised herself on a night she did not talk about that she would never open her mouth to plead again. So she said nothing, and 3 days later, when word came up the mountain that Cabe Halloran had not come home, and that his family was asking questions, and that the last thing he had told the alehouse was that he was going to find the witch, Logan Hale stood in the middle of his own hut, with that knife on the table between them, and asked her where she had been that night. He did not mean to say it. It was out of his mouth before he knew it was in his head. She looked at him. She did not shout. She did not deny it. She did not explain herself. She simply looked at him, and he watched something close behind her eyes like a shutter coming down. Then she stood, took her cloak off the peg, and walked out into the snow. He said her name. She did not stop. She sat on the ridge all night, 40 paces from his door, with her back against a rock, because she would not go inside and she would not go away. She sat on that rock and could not breathe properly. What frightened her was that this one had gone into her like a spear. Logan came out after midnight with 2 blankets and a lamp. She heard him coming because she heard everything, and she did not turn around. He sat down in the snow beside her, put 1 blanket over her shoulders and 1 over his own, and shook with cold for about an hour. And neither of them spoke. He said 1 moment had been enough to kill 2 people. He said that tonight he had thought something for 1 moment, and that he was more ashamed than he had ever been of anything in his life, and that she should not forgive him for it, and that he would understand if she left. But he said he was not going back inside until she did, because he had spent 15 years being a man who stayed warm while somebody else sat out in the cold, and he was finished with it. He said all of this looking straight ahead at the trees, because he could not look at her. The wind came up the valley. After a long time, she said that in her language there was no word for sorry. She said there was only a word that meant, "I will stand where you stand." Then she stood and put her hand under his arm, and lifted him out of the snow like a bundle of kindling, and carried him back inside, because his legs had gone numb, and he could not feel them, and would not have admitted it. She put him in his own bed. She sat by the fire. Neither of them slept. And 2 days later, while Ashvael was arguing in the chapel about whether to go up Grey Hollow with torches and drive the green woman off the mountain, Tola's barn caught fire and burned to the ground with 11 animals inside it. There was a lamp in that barn. There is always a lamp in a barn. By the following morning, nobody in Ashval believed it was the lamp, but grief needs a shape. Fear needs a face. And a village that has been frightened for 3 winters will take whatever face it is offered and hold on to it with both hands. Because a face can be driven away, and weather cannot, they began calling her the Green Widow, then the Mountain Curse, then, more quietly and more often, the thing in Logan's hut. He was cleaning the door when she woke up. It was not yet light. Somebody had come up in the night and nailed 2 crossed sticks bound with red thread to his doorframe, the old charm against the evil eye, the sort of thing his grandmother made and his father sneered at, and under it, on the step, they had left a hare with its throat opened and its blood frozen down the wood. Logan was on his knees with a rag and a bucket, scrubbing quietly, trying to get it out of the grain before she saw it. He did not hear her come to the door. She stood there in her shirt, in the freezing dark, and looked at the blood on the wood, and at the charm in his hand, and at the bucket, and she asked him how long. He said it was nothing. She asked him how long. So he told her. The market, the boy with the black hair in his fist, Perrin's question and his own lie, the dead sheep and the barn, and the boy's fever and the second sack of beans, 6 weeks. He had been carrying it for 6 weeks and had not said one word, and she went very still, and then she was angrier than he had ever seen her. She said she did not want his protection. She said she had never once in her life needed a human to stand in front of her, that she could walk into that village at noon, and there was not a man in it who could stop her, and that he had made her into a thing that had to be hidden, and that this was the closest anyone had ever come to insulting her. And Logan stood up with a bloody rag in his hand and said that he was not protecting her. He said he was protecting his home. He said that this was his door, and that this was the fire she slept beside, and that they had put blood on it, and that if she walked down into Ashvale at noon and proved every single thing they said about her, then there would be nothing left up here for either of them to come back to. He said he had spent 15 years with nothing worth protecting, said he was not going to be careless with it now, and Zara stopped. He had said home. He had used the word about a place that had her in it. She opened her mouth, and she did not have anything to put in it, and that had never once happened to her before. And then, down the slope, a dog barked, not a fox, a dog. 2 of them, and a man's voice hushing them, and the wrong kind of quiet afterwards. Zara turned her head. She listened for 4 seconds. Then she picked up the lamp and walked out into the yard and held it low over the snow. And Logan came out behind her. And they both stood there looking down at the ground below the step. Boots, fresh, coming up from the village side, moving slowly, spread out. Zara counted them once, out loud, in a voice with nothing in it at all. There were 11 sets. They were still 400 paces down the slope, and she had heard them long before the dogs. She told Logan, 11. 2 with dogs. One of them was limping. He got back inside and started pulling his boots on with his hands, shaking so badly he could not manage the laces. And she said something then, very quietly, in a voice he had never heard from her. She said that if she went out to meet them, none of them would go home. She said it as a simple statement of fact, which is what it was. 11 frightened farmers with billhooks and 2 dogs against her in the dark, on ground she had learned. It would not have been a fight. It would have been a chore. Then she said that if she did that, they would come back with 100 and burn the hut, and hang him from his own roof beam for harboring her. She said the mathematics did not matter, because there were men in that group with children, and she had already killed enough people's fathers to last her. She put the blade down on the table. She sat on the floor in the corner where the shadow was deepest, and pulled her cloak over herself, and made herself as small as it is possible for a woman of her size to be, which is not very small at all, and she said, without any particular emotion, that this was his door now, and that he could open it or not, the knocking when it came, was very loud. Logan Hale stood in his own hut in the dark, with his hand on the latch, and 15 years came down on him all at once. Like a roof, he opened the door. He stood in it. He filled it as much as a thin man can fill a doorway, and he held the lamp up so that they could see his face. And he wished good morning to 11 men who had come to burn his home down. He knew every one of them. He had gone to chapel school with 2 of them. Toller, whose barn had burned, was at the back with a lamp of his own, and could not meet his eye. Halloran's father was at the front, and his hands were shaking. And that was the moment Logan understood that these were not monsters. These were men who had lost sheep and sons, and had run out of ideas. They asked him what he was keeping in there. He said he was keeping a bed, an axe, a bag of beans and a bad roof, and that they were welcome to any of it. They said they had heard things. He answered that he had heard things too. He said he had heard that Cabe Halloran went up the east face in a whiteout without snowshoes, that Toller's barn had a lamp in it, that sheep in a broken fold dies when it is 15 below, and he said that if there was a witch on this mountain, she was doing a very poor job of it, since she had left the charcoal burner alive, and he was the only thing up here worth taking. Somebody laughed. One person. It was thin, but it was a laugh. Halloran's father said his son had been a fool, but had been his son, and Logan said yes. He said that was true. He said he was sorry, and he meant it. And the man's face broke a little, and then old Perrin, who had walked all the way up that mountain at 71 years of age and had not yet said one word, looked past Logan into the dark of the hut at the corner where the shadow was deepest. Then he said they should go down before the light came, and that they had a long walk. And they went. Logan closed the door and slid down it until he was sitting on the floor, and he could not get his breath, and his whole body was shaking. She was still in the corner. She said, after a long time, that he had lied to them very well. He said it had not been a lie. Not one word of it. She said that was why it had worked. Then she said something so quietly that he barely caught it. She said that in 12 years, in a hall of 9,000 people, nobody had ever once stood between her and a door. He asked what she meant. She did not answer. In April, a tinker came up the trail, and he came up on his hands and knees. Logan heard him before he saw him, a wet, wheezing noise in the trees below the woodpile, and found him 40 paces down, dragging himself uphill with one arm. With a broken wrist and a split scalp and no wagon and no horse, they got him inside. Zara carried him. He was too far gone to be frightened of her, which Logan thought afterwards was the only mercy in the whole night. His dog came up the trail behind him, a grey, ugly, half-starved thing with one ear, and it would not be coaxed, and it would not be driven off. It lay down across the doorway with its chin on its paws and stayed there, and it was still there a month later, because the tinker went down the mountain in May, and the dog did not go with him. He said they had taken him on the pass road at dusk, 6 or 7 of them. He said they had not robbed him. That was the part he kept coming back to, with his teeth chattering and his hands around a bowl he could not hold. They had turned out every crate in that wagon. Copper pots, needles, 3 rolls of good cloth, a purse with 11 shillings in it. They had left all of it in the mud. They had wanted one thing. One of them had crouched down in front of him and unrolled a piece of paper and held it up in the lamplight. And on that paper, in ink, drawn by somebody with a good hand, was the face of an orc woman. They had asked him whether he had seen her, and when he said no, they had broken his wrist and asked him again, and then his scalp, and asked him again, and then they had let him crawl away up the mountain, which is a thing that men only do, the tinker said, when they want a message carried. Zara had gone to the window. She was not looking at the tinker. She was looking out at the black trees below the trail, and her head was tilted, and she was listening to something. Logan asked what it was. She said a horse. She said there was a bell on it. Very small, the kind a man puts on a horse when he does not care whether he is heard, because he does not expect to be run from. The tinker started to shake. Logan asked him, quietly, who they were, and the tinker, with a broken wrist, in a stranger's hut 300 miles from anywhere, in front of an orc who could have snapped him, would not say it. He said he would not say the name in the dark. Logan asked him again, and he said it. In the end, the way a man puts down a stone he has been carrying too long. Brakkath. Logan was watching her when the tinker said it, and he remembered what he saw for the rest of his short life. She did not gasp. She did not reach for the blade. Her whole body simply stopped. Every part of it at once, the way a candle stops when you pinch it. For about 2 seconds she was not in the room at all. Then she came back and turned from the window and told Logan to put more wood on the fire because the tinker was going into shock and her hand was completely steady. That was the worst part. That night, when the tinker was asleep, she began to pack. Logan stood in the doorway and watched her. And then he asked her to stay. He did not say anything clever. He said please, which she still did not properly understand. And he said stay, which she understood perfectly. She answered that if she stayed, they would find her here. She said that when they found her here, they would find him too, and that they would not simply kill him. She said she knew exactly what would be done to a human who had hidden her, because she had watched it done in a hall from a seat some years ago, and she had said nothing, and Logan, who had never won an argument with anybody in his life, said one sentence. He said that a woman had knocked on his door once, and he had let her freeze. He would rather die, he said. With the door open, she stood there with her cloak in her hands. She did not unpack it, but she did not leave either. She sat down by the fire and she stayed, and it was the worst decision she ever made. And she made it because she was 31 years old and had spent every day of her life being useful to people who did not know her name. And this small, thin, soot-covered idiot had opened a door for her. Later that night, she fell asleep sitting against the wall by the fire, and her head came down slowly onto his shoulder. He sat there with his arm going numb and a bruise forming on his collarbone from her tusk, and he did not move for 3 hours. He thought, with perfect clarity, I do not want her to leave. And in the morning, waking with a crick in her neck and the smell of wood smoke in her hair, she thought, I have never once in my life been this quiet inside. Neither of them said a word about it. Neither of them ever did. Her wound turned on her in May. She was well at dusk. By midnight she was burning and out of her mind, and in the dark, out of her head, she gave orders. She spoke to people who were not in the room. She told someone called Arya to hold the western stairs, whatever it cost. She told a council in flat contempt that the deep gallery would not open. Not for iron, not for the northern contract, not while she held the ring. Then she began to count. She reached 61 and stopped, and then she begged. She begged 61 people to forgive her, one at a time, and she used their names, and it took a very long time. Near dawn, when Logan pulled her shirt aside to reach the wound, he saw it, high on her back under the shoulder blade, in skin that was otherwise unmarked, a brand. A broken mountain inside a ring of hammered strokes, burned into her years ago by somebody who had heated the iron properly and taken their time. He did not know what it meant. He knew it was not the sort of thing you find on a woman who has robbed a merchant. The fever broke at noon. She woke, saw his face, and knew immediately that he had heard everything. She asked what she had said. He told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked him to sit down and said that she was going to speak and that he should not interrupt because she would only be able to do it once. And before she could begin, the tinker's dog started barking in the yard, and a man came up the trail so fast that he fell twice. It was the peddler from the low valley. He had run the last mile. He stood in the yard, grey in the face, and told Logan Hale that there were riders in the pass. Orcs, 40 at least, black and iron-grey, riding the valley end to end, knocking on doors and not breaking them, paying good silver for anything that sounded like a green woman on a mountain, and frightening the whole country half to death simply by existing. And he said the word the way you say the name of a storm that has already flattened the next county. They were looking, he said, for the Iron Widow. The wounded stranger Logan carried out of that cave was never merely a widow. Subscribe to Orphan Saga, because in the next 60 seconds he's going to learn exactly who has been sleeping under his roof. She told him her name first. She said it standing with her back to the fire, in a voice she had not used once in 5 months. Zara Stonemarrow. Logan said that meant nothing to him, and she said that was the problem, because it meant something to 9,000 other people, and every one of them believed she belonged to them. Then she took the leather cord from around her neck and put the iron ring on the table between them. It was not beautiful. It was a plain, heavy, ugly band of black iron with nothing cut into it at all, and it had been made for a man's thumb. She said it had been her husband's. Logan said the name before he could stop himself. He asked about Nolan. Down in the trees, a long way off, a horn sounded. One note it rolled up the valley and died. Zara did not look at the window. She said that when she was 19, they had given her to Logan Stonemarrow to end a war between two hills. She said nobody had asked her. She said he had been a hard man and not a cruel one, and that she had learned to respect him the way you grow fond of a house you did not choose to live in. She said he had died with a spear through his lung on a raid he had no business going on. Logan asked what a ring had to do with any of it, and she told him what happens when an orc chief dies. Without a son, the widow holds the iron ring. She holds the seat. She holds 12 mines, and the largest iron seam in the north, and the lives of 9,000 people, until the Spring Council decides otherwise, and by an older law, the dead chief's war second may claim the widow, and by claiming her, claim everything she holds. The horn came again, closer. Logan got up and went to the shutter and looked out, and away down the black valley he could see torches. Not many, strung out in a line moving up. He asked her, without turning around, what the war second's name was. She said he already knew it. Brakkath had asked her twice, the first time in private and almost gently, the second time in the hall, in front of the whole clan, and it had not really been a question. It had been a piece of arithmetic performed out loud. She had refused him, flat in public, with no soft words wrapped around it. Because in that hall, a soft word is an open gate. 11 days later, she rode the high pass with 4 of her guards, and men with very good steel and no marks on their leather came out of the rocks above the road. Her guards died, all 4. She named them one at a time, and Logan watched her hands while she did it. She killed 6. She took a spear under the ribs, and rode until the horse went down under her, and then she walked, and then she crawled, and then she found a dry cave with a seam of melt in the roof, and she banked a fire, and she cut a warning and set it at the mouth, and she waited 5 days for men she was certain were coming, and instead, a charcoal burner walked in because he was cold. Logan sat down on the edge of his own bed. He said that he had given a queen a bowl of barley and shouted at her about a roof. She said he had also carried her up a mountain on his back, and that in her whole life nobody had ever done anything for her without naming a price first. Then she said there was one more thing, and that he was going to hate it. She told him about the 61 2 years ago. The deep gallery of the Stonemarrow mine had been driven through a seam the old timber masters had warned her against. There was a contract with the northern clans. The clan needed the iron. She was young, newly widowed, and every man on that council was waiting for her to be weak. So she gave the order. The mountain came down on 61 of her people. They had never brought the bodies out. It was too deep, too broken, too likely to take more lives in the trying. The gallery was sealed with stone and with shame, and there was not a family in Karn Vetha without somebody still down there in the dark, unburied, unnamed at the fire. She said they called her the Iron Widow and believed it was a title of respect. She said that every time she heard it, she heard 61 people being buried alive, outside. A horse screamed somewhere below the tree line. Zara picked her blade up off the table, and Logan, who had opened his chest to her, who had told her about the door and the fence and the shawl, who had lied to his own village for her, heard himself. Getting angry, he asked whether he had been a hiding place. He asked whether she had laughed at his wooden birds. She turned around with the blade in her hand, and she said no, and her voice cracked on it. And it was the first crack he had ever heard in her. She said that from the moment he knew, he would look at her the way every other living creature looked at her, not at her. At the ring, she said she had been the Iron Widow for so long that she had forgotten. She was also a woman who liked barley. They never got to finish it. The first arrow came through the shutter and went into the wall, exactly where Logan had been standing, one breath. Earlier, there were 9 of them, and they were not orcs. They were human sellswords, the cleverest and most cowardly thing Brakkath Orden ever did. Because no orc could be called to account in any hall for what human bandits did in a human valley. What followed was not a battle. It was a fight in the dark, on a mountain, in a place one man knew better than he knew his own face. Logan had no strength, and he knew it. So he used the only thing he had ever owned, which was the ground. He took them past the charcoal pit and kicked the covering in, and a season of smothered fire came up out of the earth in a wall of smoke so thick and so foul that men inside it could not tell up from down. His snares were in that smoke. He had set them himself that autumn for hares. The slope past the pit drops away without warning, and he had known where it dropped for 15 years, and they did not. He cut the rope on the woodpile above the trail, and a winter's worth of split pine went down the hill, and 4 men went under it, and Zara came out of that smoke with her dead husband's blade in both hands, coughing, half-healed, one eye shut with soot, and she was the most frightening thing any of those men had ever seen. And 2 of them turned and ran, and were never seen in that country again. It ended near the ridge. Her blade was buried in a man's chest and would not come free, and the last of them came in behind her with a sword raised, and there was nothing between her back and that blade, except a charcoal burner. Logan did not think about it. He was very clear about that afterwards in the short time he had. He said there was no decision in it at all. He simply put himself in the way. The sword went into his shoulder above the collarbone and out through his back. And he heard her scream in her own language, a sound he had never heard from any living thing. And then the snow came up to meet him. He woke in his own bed with her holding a cloth to the wound and her enormous hands shaking so badly she could barely keep the pressure on. She told him he was the stupidest man who had ever drawn breath. She told him she had killed the last one with her hands. She told him that if he ever did that again, she would leave him where he fell, and she was crying, which he had not known she could do, and she was furious about it, and Logan said through his teeth that he did not care about her ring. He said he had not carried a queen up this mountain. He had carried her. She stopped. She put her forehead down against his, very carefully, mindful of the tusks in the way of her people. And she said that in 31 years, nobody had ever put their body between her and a blade, and that she had no word for what she felt in either of her languages, and that she had begun to suspect there was no such word anywhere. Outside, on the trail below, 40 riders were coming up through the trees with torches. At their head rode a captain named Arya, who had been hunting for her mistress for 31 days, and had not slept for 11 of them. Logan stood in his doorway in a bloody shirt with his arm strapped across his chest and watched 40 orc warriors go down on one knee in his snow and put their fists into the ground, and Zara walked out to meet them. And he watched her change, the woman who could not cook, the woman who stole the blanket, the woman who had fallen off his roof and laughed at him with her side open. She folded herself away somewhere behind her own eyes and put something else on. Her back straightened. Her voice dropped and hardened until it was a thing built for filling halls. She put the iron ring on her thumb, and every warrior in that clearing rose at once as one, like a wave. Logan had never in his life felt so small. On the second night she came to him alone, in her own colors now, black and iron gray, and she stood in his one-room hut with her head bent under the beam and her hands empty at her sides, and she was frightened. He could see it. He had learned her face. She said it the way her people say things, straight, with no path around it. She wanted him to come to Karn Vetha and be her husband, not a consort, not an ornament, not a human kept in a warm room and brought out to be looked at by visiting clans. Her equal, at the table, at the fire, in the hall, with a voice in council and the right to use it. She said the clan would hate it. She said the council would fight her, that some of her own blood would never speak to her again, and that there would be men who would try to kill him for it. She said she would do it anyway, and then she said the rest. She said that if he did not want her, he could have anything else instead. Land in the eastern valleys, good land with water, silver enough that he would never touch charcoal again. Her protection, declared aloud in the hall in front of 9,000 people, so that no human lord and no orc warrior could ever lay a hand on him. She said she would give him all of it and ride away and never trouble him again, and that this was a true offer and not a threat. Then she looked at the floor, which he had never once seen her do, and she said that she loved him. She said her language had no soft way of saying it. She said she was glad because she did not want it to soften. Logan sat down on the edge of his own bed because his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him up. He asked her for one night. She gave it, and he saw exactly what it cost her, and she gave it anyway. He did not sleep. He thought about being the only human in a stronghold of 9,000 orcs. Laughed at. Stepped around. Poisoned eventually by somebody's ambitious cousin. A foot and a half shorter than every person at the table for the rest of his life, and then he thought about refusing. This hut, the birds on the windowsill, the barley, the long white silence of the next 30 winters, and her laugh existing nowhere in the world except inside his own skull, getting quieter every year until he died up here and was found in the spring by a peddler, and near the end of that night he understood something. And it went through him like cold water. Had spent 15 years paying a debt to a woman at a fence, and the debt had never once been about her. It had been about the door. He had spent his whole life standing on the wrong side of a door he was too frightened to open. And every good thing that had ever happened to him had happened on the one occasion when he opened one. At sunrise, he walked down to the camp in his patched coat and his broken boots, in front of 40 warriors and 3 advisors and a captain with her hand on her axe. He stood in front of the Iron Widow of the Stonemarrow, and he said, loudly enough for every one of them to hear, that he did not want her mines. He did not want her silver. He did not want her land, or her protection, or her titles. He wanted her. He was terrified. He was coming anyway. She crossed the ground in 4 strides and took his face in both hands, which covered most of it, and pressed her forehead against his in the way of her people. She spoke the oath of the fire in her own tongue. Then, because she was a woman who believed in doing a thing properly, she said it again to him. He gave her the plain vow of the valley, the one his mother had taught him before he was old enough to understand what promises cost. Nobody cheered, but an old orc woman in a grey cloak, standing right at the back, watched the whole thing with her head on one side, and smiled with the 3 teeth she had left. Karn Vetha was black stone cut into a mountainside, and it stopped him at the gate. The guard on the eastern arch put out one hand and told Logan Hale that humans did not pass. He said it flatly, with his chief standing 4 feet away, which tells you everything about how much of the clan was already against her. Zara turned. Her hand went to her belt and the guard's face went grey, and every orc on that wall knew that she was going to break him in front of them, and Logan said her name. He said, quietly, that if he walked through that gate because they were afraid of her, then he would never once, for the rest of his life, be a man who belonged inside it. He said he would rather stand in the snow, so he stood in the snow for 2 hours in front of 200 watching orcs, until a captain named Arya came down off the wall, looked at him for a long moment, and opened the gate herself. She did not say anything. She did not have to. She had ridden 31 days for a woman she thought was dead, and she had found her alive in a charcoal burner's hut, and she had seen what that hut looked like. They gave him a chair at the high table. It was a child's chair. Somebody had carried it up from the lower hall and set it in the place of the chief's husband, and there was a laugh that went along the benches like a stone skipping on water, and it did not stop. Zara began to stand up, and Logan put his hand flat on her wrist and pushed it down. The first time he had ever touched her in public, in front of 9,000 people, and then he climbed up and stood on the child's chair with a cup in his hand. He began by agreeing with them. He was small. He said he had been small his entire life, and that he had been cold and poor, and had eaten worse than the dogs in that hall ate, and that none of it had ever killed him. He said he had been given a chair by people who wanted him to feel it, and that he was standing on it because from up here he could see all of their faces, and he intended to learn every one of them. Then he drank to the 61. The hall went absolutely silent. Nobody in Karn Vetha had said that number out loud at that table in 2 years. They broke his birds in the 2nd month. He had been given a workshop off the forge yard, a room with good light and a bench, and he had filled the windowsill with them the way he had filled a windowsill for 15 winters. Somebody came in at night and took every one of them off the sill and smashed them on the floor and ground the pieces under a heel. Zara found out within an hour. She knew exactly who had done it, the cook's brother, a big, loud, stupid orc with a grudge and a knife, and she went for the forge yard with murder in her face and Arya running behind her. Logan was already sitting on the floor of the workshop, picking through the wreckage. He would not let her go. He held her by the arm with both hands, which was like holding a door in a gale, and he said that if she killed a man over 10 pieces of pine, every orc in that fortress would say the human had cost them a life. And they would be right. He told her he could make more birds. He could not make her a clan. So she stood there, shaking with rage, and did nothing. And Logan spent 11 nights gluing and pegging and carving. And out of the broken pieces of 12 small birds, he made one large one, a hawk, with a wingspan the length of his forearm, seamed and scarred all over where the joins were. And he did not sand the scars out. He set it on the arm of the iron seat in the high hall, in front of everybody, and left it there. Nobody touched it, and the cook's brother, who had smashed them, was the 3rd orc to volunteer for the deep gallery in the spring. Brakkath came to the spring council 10 months after Logan first stood outside that gate in the snow. He came openly, with 100 spears at his back, and stood in the middle of the high hall and invoked the Rite of Claim. He was not a monster. That was the thing. He was a broad, greying, courteous orc of 50, with a good voice, and he made an argument that half the clan agreed with. He said the seat had been held by a widow for 2 years, and in that time the eastern holdings had not been raided, and the northern contracts had not been renewed. He said the clan was drifting. He said the widow had now brought a human into the high hall and seated him at the chief's table, and that this was not a scandal, it was a symptom, and then he invoked the law. The widow's seat was contested. The challenger and the widow's chosen man, in the circle, with steel. It was a death sentence, and every orc in that hall knew it. Brakkath had killed 30 men in that circle over 30 years. Logan Hale weighed less than his armor. Zara stood and said she would take the circle herself. Brakkath smiled, because that was precisely what he had come for. And the law would not permit it, because the law is the law, and it does not bend for anybody, which is the entire point of a law. And then the old orc in the grey cloak stood up. Her name was Nahka. She was 90 years old, the last living timber master of the Stonemarrow. 2 years ago, she had warned a young chieftain's widow about a certain seam in the deep gallery, and had been ignored, and had never once said so out loud, not even while they were carrying out the shrouds. She said the Rite of Claim was older than steel. She said its oldest form was the weighing. Each man who would claim the seat sets before the clan what he will give it. The clan hears both, and the widow speaks last. Brakkath, who could not be seen to fear an old woman and a human, agreed, and made a joke about it, and got a laugh. He offered 300 spears, an alliance with the northern hills, the reopening of the raids, iron, war, and a return to the old strength. It was a strong offer. In the cold light, it was a far better offer than the clan had had in years, and Logan watched 200 faces turn toward it like plants turning toward a window. Then Logan Hale climbed onto his child's chair, so that he could be seen. He said he had nothing. He said he owned an axe, some carving knives, and, until recently, a hut with a bad roof. He had no spears, no alliances, and no name at all. He said he had spent 20 years of his life learning one single thing, which was how timber holds weight, how a prop takes a load, how a beam tells you, hours before it fails, that it is thinking about failing, how air moves through a shaft, and how a candle flame will tell an honest man when the air has gone bad. If he is willing to look at it, he said he had spent the winter with Naga over the old maps, foot by foot. He said the fall had not been the mountain's doing, and here he looked at his wife and said that it had not been entirely hers either. He said that with crib timbering and a driven side shaft, worked slowly from the eastern face over one season, by men in no hurry, the gallery could be opened. He said he could not give them war. He said he could give them their dead back. The hall went completely silent. 61 families. 2 years of stone and shame and unnamed fires. Somewhere at the back, a woman began to weep, and then another, and it moved through that hall like water through sand. Zara spoke last. As the law required, she said one sentence. She said that she had given the order that sealed the gallery, and that she would give the order that opened it. The first month, they did not listen to him. They took his timber and set it where they liked. They laughed when he tested the air with a candle. A crew boss told him to his face that no human had ever cut stone in Karn Vetha, and no human ever would. Then, on a Tuesday in the 4th week, Logan stopped dead in the 3rd drift and made everybody stand still and be quiet. He told them the beam over the crossing was talking. Nobody heard anything. He put them out anyway, shoved them, pushed them, ran the last man out with a hand in his collar, and 11 seconds after the last boot cleared the crossing, 40 tons of roof came down where they had been standing. Nobody laughed at the candle after that. The 2nd month, somebody moved a map. Logan found it because the ink was too fresh. A whole section of the old gallery plan redrawn, showing solid rock where the flooded lower drift actually was, and if he had trusted it, he would have put 20 men through a wall into 40 feet of black water. He did not tell Zara, he told Naga, and the two of them sat up all night redrawing it. And Naga looked at him over the lamp and asked why he was keeping it quiet. Logan said that if his wife knew, she would turn this mine into a political killing, and the clan would say the human had brought a war into the shaft. He said they were digging up 61 people. He said that was the only thing this hole was allowed to be about. The 3rd month, the timber came in wet, good pine, bought and paid for, stacked under a sound roof, and half of it soaked through and softened, which is a thing that does not happen by accident. Logan pulled it all. He set the crews to cutting fresh and lost 9 days, and did not explain why to anybody. That was also the month a miner named Gesk stopped calling him the human. He did it in front of 30 men, in a drift, with rock dust in his teeth. He needed a prop passed to him, and he wanted it fast. And he shouted a name instead of a word. He shouted Logan, and Logan passed him the prop. And neither of them said anything about it, and that was the happiest hour of Logan Hale's life. The 4th month, a man came at him with a chisel. It happened in the dark at the bottom of the side shaft, and it should have worked, and it did not, because the man was a miner and not a killer, and he hesitated for half a second. Logan broke his arm with a prop and sat on his chest until the crew came running. They found a coin sewn into the lining. Of the man's boot, it was not a Stonemarrow coin. Stonemarrow money is stamped with a broken mountain. This one carried a hooked spear over a split tusk. And there is exactly one house in the north that mints it. And every orc in that shaft knew whose house it was, or done. Logan looked at that coin for a long time on his knees, bleeding from the ear, in a hole 400 feet under a mountain. Then he put it in his pocket and told the crew that the man had been drunk. He never told her. He carried that coin for 11 days, and in the 4th month, when a roof began to shift in the lower drift and 40 orcs were standing under it, not one of them ran. They stood, and they took the load, and they held the props on the word of a human who weighed nothing. And they held them for 4 minutes, until he told them to go. That was the week the first shrouded body came, out into the light. Gesk took the weight of it. It was his brother. And then he came and found Logan and gripped his forearm in the warrior's hold and could not let go, and could not speak. 59 of them came out that way, and every evening Zara stood at the mouth of that shaft with iron dust in her hair and watched her husband climb up out of the mountain that had eaten her people, filthy, grinning, alive. She had spent her entire life being told what strength was. She stood at that shaft mouth and understood that every single person who had ever told her had been wrong. Brakkath had not gone north. He had gone quiet, which is worse. On the last day, with 2 of the 61 still to bring out, somebody cut a prop. Logan knew whose hand it was before the dust settled. He had the coin in his pocket. The gallery went at about the 10th hour, with a sound like the world clearing its throat. There were 6 men in the deep. Logan got 4 of them into the side shaft. He shoved them in one at a time, with his hands flat on their backs, shouting in a language he had learned in one winter and one summer. Then he turned around and went back. He went back because there were 2 more. He found them under the 4th fall. One was a timber hand of 40 with a broken leg, and Logan got him up and got him moving and pointed him at the light and pushed him. The other was a boy of 15 named Vesh. He was pinned. He was screaming, and the roof was coming. It is important to understand that Logan knew every orc who came out of that shaft said the same thing afterwards, and said it to their children, and their children have said it since. He knew. He looked up at that roof and knew exactly what it was going to do and exactly how long he had, because he was the only man in that mountain who could read it. He had time to turn around. He turned the other way. They dug for 2 days. Zara dug with her hands until her fingers would not close, and the nails were gone from 3 of them. Iria took her by the shoulders on the 2nd night and told her that she was the chief and that she could not do this. Zara put her captain through a timber wall. Then she went back to digging. They found the boy alive on the morning of the 3rd day. He was alive because there was a body over him, wrapped around him, folded down on top of him, arms locked around his head, back turned up into the fall, holding the weight of a mountain off a 15-year-old boy with a spine that had never been strong and had held anyway, exactly like a woman at a fence, in a shawl, in the snow. On a night when Logan Hale was 19 years old and standing behind a door he would not open. She had done everything a person can do. It had not been enough. This time, it was enough. They carried him up out of the dark on the 3rd morning, along with the 61st of the lost. He was the last man ever to come out of that gallery, and they sealed it behind him and have never opened it since. The coin came out of Logan's coat pocket when they washed him. Arya took it and turned it over once in her palm and said nothing at all. Then she went down to the lower cells, to the man with the broken arm who had been holding his tongue for a season. He did not hold it for very long. Brakkath was found before nightfall. Arya found him. There was no circle and no rite, and there were no witnesses, and the clan did not ask a single question about it. Then or ever, Zara never spoke his name again in her life. They burned Logan Hale at the eastern face, at the mouth of the shaft he opened. on a fire so tall that the villages in the valley below saw the light of it on the underside of the clouds and did not know what it meant. 9,000 orcs stood in the dark and listened to their chief read 62 names into the fire. His was the last one. It was the only human name ever spoken there. She went back to the mine the next morning. She was at the mouth of the eastern face before light, in her good cloak, with a lamp in her hand. And she had got as far as the first crossing when the clan healer put a hand on her arm and stopped her. The healer was an old woman, and she was not frightened of chiefs. She said that Zara could not go into the mine again. Zara told her to take her hand away. She said that grief was not an illness, and that she did not require nursing, and that if the healer spoke to her again in that voice, she would be sent to the northern holdings on foot. And the healer said that she was not speaking of grief. She said there were 2 heartbeats under her ribs, and that she had been listening to the second one for 3 weeks, and that she had been waiting for a good day to say so. She said there had not been a good day. Zara stood at the mouth of the shaft that had killed her husband, in the dark with a lamp in her hand. She did not weep. Aurea, who was 10 paces behind her and heard all of it, said afterwards that she simply put the lamp down on the stone very carefully, the way you put down something that belongs to somebody who's coming back for it. Then she turned around and walked up the hill. The council sat 11 days after the funeral, because the world does not stop, and an advisor rose to give his opinion. And he began the way advisors had begun for 2 years. He addressed her as the Iron Widow. Zara did not draw a blade. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She reached over and she took the wooden hawk off the arm of the iron seat, the ugly seamed one, made out of 12 broken birds, and she put it down in the middle of the council table, in front of all of them, and she said, "My name is Zara." Nobody spoke. The advisor tried to apologize, and she told him not to, because an apology is a thing you offer for a mistake. And he had not made a mistake. He had said what everybody in that hall had been saying for 2 years, and she had let them, and she had worn it, and she had thought it made her strong. The man who had died in her mine, she told them, had never once used it. She said he had known her name before he knew her title, and had used it while she was bleeding on a stone floor in a cave, and had gone on using it in front of 9,000 people who thought he was a fool for it. She said she had lost the only person alive who knew who she was, and then she said that they should go on with the northern contracts, and they did. And the meeting lasted another 2 hours, and not one person in that room got any work done at all. It took her a winter to understand it. She understood it sitting on the spoil heap above the eastern face, in the cold, doing the arithmetic. She was 19 when they gave her to a man to end a war, and nobody asked her. Nolan died on a raid, he went on, because a chief who does not raid is a chief who will be replaced. Brakkath hunted her across 300 miles because of a seat 61. People died under the stone because a young widow needed, more than she needed, air, to be seen as strong by a room full of men who were waiting for her to fail. And Logan went into the deep gallery because a clan that she ruled needed its dead back. Every one of them, every single one, without exception, was killed by the same thing, and she had been carrying that thing on her thumb for 2 years and calling it her duty. The iron seat had given her 9,000 subjects. It had never given her one person who knew her name before they knew her title. It had given her exactly one of those once for 1 winter, in a hut with a bad roof, and it had taken him back. She called the clan in the spring. She stood beside the iron seat in a plain grey coat with no colours on it at all, and she took the ring off her thumb and held it up so that the ones at the back could see it. And she said that this ring had been given to her by a dead man's law, and that she had never in her life chosen it, and that she was choosing now. She set it down on the seat. She did not throw it. She put it down the way you put down a tool you have finished using, and the sound it made on the iron was very small, and every person in that hall heard it. Then she named Arya, and Arya, in front of 9,000 people, refused. She said no. Out loud, she said the chief was grieving and was not in her right mind, and that she would not take a ring off a seat like a thief while the woman who wore it was still standing next to it. She said Zara had held that clan together through 2 years that would have broken any orc alive, and that she was not going to be handed her mistress's life as a gift. She said she had ridden 31 days for her. She said she would ride 31 more, and that Zara should sit down and eat something, and stop this. And Zara said the quiet thing that ended it. She said that was exactly why. She said the seat should never be given to somebody who wants it, because a person who wants it will do what she did, will push a gallery through a bad seam to prove they deserve it, and bury 61 people to look strong at a table. She said she had wanted it. Not at first, but she had learned to want it, the way you learn to want anything you are frightened of losing. She said Arya did not want it, and had refused it in public, in front of the whole clan, at the cost of everything, and that there was not another orc in that mountain she would trust with a shaft, let alone a people. Then old Naga, 90 years old, walked the length of that hall, picked up the ring off the iron seat and put it into Arya's hand, and closed the fingers over it, and a young warrior in the crowd called out and asked what she would be. Without the seat, he did not mean it cruelly. He was frightened, and he wanted to know who was going to look after them. Zara stopped on the steps. She said that for one winter, on a mountain, in a hut with a bad roof, there had been a man who learned her face before he learned her name, and her name before he learned her title, and who never once used the title in his life unless a ceremony forced him to. She had liked that woman, she told him. She said she had not seen her in a long time, and that she was going to go and look for her, and that she thought she knew where she might be. Then she walked out of the high hall, and she never went back into it again. Naga took her as an apprentice at 90 years old, and worked her like a dog, and was hard on her in front of the crews. And it was the making of her. The clan thought it was grief. They thought the widow would tire of playing at timber, and come back up the hill. She was 14. Months into it, when the 4th drift went bad, she came out of it at noon on an ordinary day, and told a crew of 30 men to stop working and get out. They did not move. The crew boss asked her what she had seen, and she said nothing, because there was nothing to see. She said the air was wrong. She said the flame had leaned twice in an hour. She said the props at the second crossing had taken a set, half an inch, no more, nothing a man would notice unless he had spent a year looking at nothing else. They laughed at her, so she closed the mine. She stood in the mouth of it, and she would not let a man past her, and there was nobody living who could get past her, and she kept 200 workers standing in a cold yard for the rest of the day, while the council was sent for. The council came. The council was not pleased. A man who had once called her the Iron Widow said in front of the crews that perhaps the timber master would like to consult her husband about it. Zara did not answer him. She sat down on a rock at the mouth of the shaft and waited. At 4:15 in the afternoon, the 4th drift came in. It went 400 feet, all the way to the second crossing, and it took 9 days to clear. And it did not take one single life, because there was not one single person in it. Nobody said anything to her at the time. Orcs do not. But the next morning, when she came down to the eastern face at first light, the crew was already standing at the mouth waiting for her, and the boss who had laughed did not call her chief. He did not call her widow. He called her timber master and asked her whether they could go in. She has walked every shaft at Karn Vetha before the crews since. Every morning, every face, every prop. She goes in first and she comes out last. Not one soul has been lost under stone since the day she put down the ring. Not one. She is 61 people behind. She knows exactly how far behind she is. There is a boy. He's 9 years old now. He is small for an orc and enormous for a human, and does not entirely fit either shape. He has green skin and black hair, and a jaw you could break a door with, and he is a very poor carver of wooden birds, and he will not be told how to do it properly by anybody, including his mother. Especially his mother. He does not live in the high hall. He lives in a low stone house on the eastern face, above the sealed gallery, with smoke coming out of the chimney and charcoal in the yard, because his mother has never been able to bring herself to buy the stuff, and says the bought charcoal is rubbish. Everyone in Karn Vetha knows when she's burning a pit, because the whole eastern face smells of it. He knows the word Tharn. He was made to learn it before he could walk properly. The fire in the middle of the house, and also home. The same word, exactly no difference, because a house without a fire is only a box you die in. In the winter, when the shutters are closed and the wind comes off the range, he sits on the rug at her feet with a knife and a piece of pine, and cuts his fingers and swears, and she does not correct the swearing. And every winter, at least once, he asks her how she met his father, and she puts down whatever is in her hands, and tells him the truth. She tells him she was dying, that she was in a cave on a mountain, alone, with a hole in her side, and that she had killed 6 men and lost 4 friends and crawled the last mile on her hands, that she had banked a fire and cut a warning and set it at the mouth, and had lain there for 5 days waiting for the men who were coming to finish her. And she tells him that instead, on the 5th night, a very small, very thin, very frightened human man came out of the snow. He was not brave, she says. He said so himself. He was not looking for anybody. He was not sent. He did not know who she was and would not have cared, and he had nothing to give, and no reason on earth to give it. He only wanted to be warm, that was all. He came in out of the cold because he wanted to sit by a fire for a while, and he found something enormous and green and bleeding in the dark that could have killed him with one hand. And instead of running, she says, he knelt. The boy asks the same thing every year. He asks whether she was frightened of him, and she always laughs and says no. And then later, when the boy is asleep and the fire is going down, she sits with a small wooden bird in her hand, badly carved, the first one he ever made, and thinks about it properly. She was a queen who had never once been chosen by anybody. He was a nobody who had never once been enough for anybody. There was one door in his life that he did not open. He was 19 years old, and he carried it every single day afterwards, and then he opened all the rest of them. He opened a cave in a storm, because he was cold. He opened his own at 2 in the morning to 11 men with torches. He opened a mountain and gave 61 families their dead back, and then he opened one more, 400 feet down in the dark, and he knew before he went through it that it would not open again from the other side. He went through it anyway. She could have kept him. If she had put the ring down 1 year earlier, she thinks about that most nights. She will think about it for the rest of her life. It is the 62nd name, and she carries it separately from the others. But there was a winter. There was a fire in the middle of a house with a bad roof. There was thin barley, and a woman laughing out loud for the first time since she was a girl, and a hot stone rolled across the floor to her feet by a man who wanted nothing at all. Some fires you only get to sit beside for one winter. You sit beside them anyway. If Logan and Zara's story touched your heart, subscribe to Orc Bond Saga for more unforgettable tales of courage, sacrifice, and love found in the darkest places. And tell us in the comments, would you have opened the door?